r/ask Reddit. What historical fact makes you cry? In World War II, an American pilot named Charles Brown was flying a B-17 in a bomb raid over Germany where his aircraft was severely shot up and entered a free fall when Brown passed out. When Brown awoke, he was only a few thousand feet above the ground and barely was able to recover the aircraft. When the Luftwaffe spotted a limping B-17 far below the formation, they dispatched a pilot named Franz Stigler, a soon-to-be ace just one kill away, with 2 downed B-17s earlier that day. As he approached from the rear, Stigler noticed that the B-17's tail gunner didn't move, and after further inspection, realized he and several other gunners were dead. Stigler saw this and remembered what his flight instructor had said years ago: "If you shoot a man in a parachute, I'll shoot you myself." Stigler saw this limping B-17 as no different from a downed pilot in a parachute. To prevent German flak cannons from taking it out, Stigler flew in formation with the B-17 all the way until the English Channel, where it landed safely. Stigler never mentioned the incident, and cold being court-martialed for it. Decades later, Charles went looking for the enemy pilot that saved his life that fateful day, and eventually met him face to face, becoming close friends and dying just a few months apart from each other in 2008. World War I mercy dogs. They would go out into no man's land and find wounded soldiers. They would bring medical supplies for the soldiers to patch themselves up, or if the soldier was too mortally wounded, stay and comfort them in their final moments. Heck, World War I on its entirety, these were kids taken out of high school sent to die on a trench. And why? So big fat guys could redraw a map in order to improve their finances. I saw some gameplay of Battlefield 1, and I'm glad that the first moments of the game are literal kids dying in meaningless ways, taking cover in mud as bullets fly by. It's one of the most miserable times of modern history. I recommend watching All Quiet on the Western Front. If you're not a fan of documentaries, this is about the closest you can get to the mental meltdown of being in the trench. Don't be discouraged by its 1934 release date. It aged very well. The story of Alex, 1977 to 2007. An African grey parrot who learned to speak, recognize objects and play with his owner. It was one of the smartest parrots ever reported. He loved his owner and his owner adored him as well. In the end, he suffered arteriosclerosis, so his owner went to see him one last time, to which Alex told his owner, "You are good. I love you." She replied, "I love you too." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and she replied, "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." That's so heartbreaking the way Alex said he'll see him tomorrow but never did. I mean, I don't know if the parrot actually knew what the words meant, but it's still really sad. Kinda makes you think, when we say it, one day, we might not see the person again either. It's pretty scary. Kinda chills me to my core. When Alexander Hamilton's eldest son died, his second child Angelica Hamilton had a mental breakdown and she never recovered. Sometimes, her family would walk into a room with only her in it, and she would be speaking to her dead brother. Teddy Roosevelt's mother Mitty and his wife Alice, who had just given birth days before, both died in the same house on the same day, hours apart from each other. In his diary entry that day, he drew a large black X and scribbled, "The light has gone out of my life." That's some heavy shit right there, man. It especially hurts if you understand Roosevelt's ideology of exuberance. He would enter rooms as if at a run. He joked in the face of assassination attempts. He believed in being alive with a capital A. But that day, the light has gone out of my life. Christmas Day, 1914. German and British soldiers got up from their trenches and called a 48-hour truce to just chill and even play soccer. This makes me cry because it shows that the soldiers of both sides really found it pointless to fight other people just cause their country said so. This is probably the strongest story of unity I've heard about in history class. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The doors to the exit in the stairwells were locked, so you either had to jump out the window or be burned alive. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing, but regulations are written in blood. There were approximately 300 infants and children that were murdered in Jonestown, being forcibly fed or injected with cyanide. I feel so much pain for all the victims, but the kids in particular make me ache with despair. There were some teens that weren't among the number, because they were gone playing a basketball tournament. If I recall correctly, Jim Jones's son was one of those teenagers who survived because of that. He was interviewed about it in a documentary I saw. Henry Gunter was an American soldier killed during World War I at 10:59 am on November 11, 1918. 1 minute before the armistice took effect at 11 am. Gunter charged a German roadblock outfitted with machine guns. German soldiers tried waving him off knowing the war would come to an end in mere moments. Apparently he got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was promptly shot and killed instantly. Sounds more like suicide by Central Powers. Makes me wonder how many soldiers actually do commit suicide by enemy combatants. Being in a war zone makes both the wanting to die and the getting shot part of suicide by cop a lot easier. The Sand Creek Massacre is particularly bad. They had so much faith in the peace treaties that had been signed, the signs of good faith from American settlers, only to be massacred. The leader of the camp, Black Kettle, desperately holding up the American flag he'd been given with a white flag underneath it, encouraging his people to gather around it thinking that the settlers would realize they were allies and stop the killings, only to be shot down. The descriptions of the massacre are brutal: children tortured and slaughtered, pregnant women with their children torn out of their stomachs, genitals torn from corpses and taken for trophies. It really made me realize you can never underestimate the cruelty of mankind, especially considering most of the murdered in this massacre were defenseless women, children, and elderly. Most if not all the astronauts aboard the Challenger survived the explosion. It was the crash into the water that would have killed them. Through genealogy, I found an old newspaper reporting an accident that happened. My 4 ex-great-grandmother and grandfather were crossing the river into Maine from Canada when their wagon tipped. He and 5 children survived. My 4 ex-great-grandmother and month-old baby did not. That tugged at my heart. I cannot imagine the devastation he and his children felt as they were moving. There was also a lot of stillborns and a lot of children who never saw past the age of 10. It's quite a sad journey at times. Reminds me of a story my grandmother told me recently. My grandfather, also Canadian, was one of 12 children. His mother died during childbirth along with the 13th child, leaving 12 mourning children and a husband. His father ended up remarrying and she raised all 12 children as her own. Irish unmarried moms were sometimes required to live in institutions, raising their own babies until they were adopted. Imagine knowing how cute your kid was, taking care of it, knowing you couldn't keep it. Sometimes they were as old as 2 or 3 when adopted. The movie Philomena dealt with this topic. The oldest recorded name for a cat was from ancient Egypt. The cat's name was Nejum, which means sweetie. Sweetie was loved thousands of years ago, but they were loved. If someone recorded their sweet little name, no need to be sad. There's no more wolves in Ireland. They are coming back to Germany, and there are already groups which want to kill them all again, and they are spreading panic. There was a news story where a woman reported to be attacked by a wolf wearing a collar. It was a lost dog looking for help, which sniffed and licked her hand. Tibetan monks who spend their lives in solitude are often murdered as their deep sense of self is too unwavering for their local government. Modern history makes me sad. Well, China already made probably hundreds of human violations. Because of them we won't get a next Dalai Lama. The assassination of Aurelian. So pointless. He could have achieved so much. He did achieve much in the short time he did rule. There is comfort to be found in that. Even if he could have done a lot more, the man's death is just sad because of how petty and stupid the reason for his assassination was. After the Pearl Harbor attack, at least some men were alive in a pocket of air inside one of the capsized ships. Navy personnel could hear them banging on the hull and trying to signal for help. But there was no way to get at them safely. The water was full of fuel and oil, so blowtorches weren't a workable idea. And there was no way for divers to get into the ship because the damage had rendered the whole thing a death trap of twisted steel. There wasn't even any way to communicate with the trapped men. So the guards at Pearl Harbor had to listen to those calls for help getting weaker and weaker, while inside everyone slowly suffocated. When they hauled the ship up for scrap later, there were 16 notches scratched onto the wall of that compartment, which means at least one casualty of Pearl Harbor lived until the 23rd of December, 1941. One of the girls in the Donner Party was fed her dead mother and told afterwards They had an agreement to not feed people their family members, but they had broken off from the camp in an attempt to find rescue. She would randomly burst into tears about it at school years later. The whole story of the Donner Party is so horrible and sad, and it bothers me that it's just used for cannibal jokes. It gets worse. They didn't have to starve. Local Indians tried to approach the party to trade with them and were driven off by gunfire because the white settlers were afraid of them. A story from my great-grandfather who fought in World War I. Soldiers would cease fire to pick up their men's bodies and would have a smoke together, go back to their trenches and start firing again. Neither side of frontline soldiers actually wanted to be there, just drafted for war. I find acts of heroic sacrifice makes me much more emotional than acts of evil and suffering. The latter is so common in the headlines that I've become desensitized to them. We all know the Thanksgiving story in Massachusetts, where the Wampanoag leader Massasoit entered into a peaceful alliance with Plymouth colonists. That peace was broken within a generation. Massasoit's son, Philip, was killed in the subsequent war. Philip's head was mounted on a pike at the entrance to Fort Plymouth, where it stood for several decades. Philip's wife and children were captured and sold into slavery in the Caribbean. Native American history is filled with stories of heartbreak and resilience, both of which frequently produce tears when hearing the stories. It doesn't exactly make me cry, but Albert Goring, the staunchly anti-Nazi brother of Hermann Goring, spent the Second World War helping Jews and dissidents to escape. He was caught several times, but was let off the hook due to his brother's influence within the Reich. After the war, he was shunned for his last name and his accomplishments forgotten. I take solace in the fact that he never did it for the recognition. Some of the world's greatest deeds have come from nameless men and women. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.